Good afternoon and welcome to the Beautiful Heart School Presents Performing in Forward Motion, an informant series featuring our wonderful faculty. Today we have Professor Ken Steen with us to talk a little bit about how he's been actually merging and communicating better in this time internationally as he interacts with his art and fellow artists. So without further ado, Professor Steen.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, connecting with today's theme, I wanted to show two brief examples of the work that I've been doing. One's slightly on the more local side, though not in Hartford, and one's in a collaboration with other artists between the US and England in London. But in my experience, international collaborations, really any kind of artistic collaborations, they don't usually just appear out of nowhere. You know, it takes time and energy in building relationships with other musicians and artists, and these relationships usually take significant time to cultivate. First and foremost, collaborations require making a leap, taking risks in order to put you and your work out there for others to get to know. And then the work you undertake together will usually have deeper artistic grounding and meaning. Today, as I said, I'd like to briefly present two projects. First is an excerpt from my most recent commission from Network for New Music, a new music ensemble that's based in Philadelphia. And the second is a project that I'm currently working on, and it's a 10-minute operetta, or a micro opera, that was instigated by a group called Opera Harmony. They're based in London, England, that in a way did essentially appear out of nowhere. I'll get to that in a little bit. So the first piece is called In Afterness, and it's scored for electric guitar, bass clarinet, cello, and quadraphonic electronic sound. The work grew from a long-standing friendship with guitarist Thomas Schuttenhelm, for whom I've written several other works, and who was named artistic director for Network for New Music about 2 years ago or so. I'd like to introduce the piece with a message that Tom wrote on the Network for New Music website a few weeks after the premiere performance on February 24th of this year. He says, the program note is somewhat prophetic. In it, Steen explains, following any large-scale occurrence, there is a moment which seems to open into eternity, an intervention of verticality, like being plucked from the continuum of time into a moment of stasis. Something is no longer in existence, never to return, and something else has not yet been born into existence. And these are moments of great potential. When these moments follow environmental happenings, weather events or ecological points of no return, extinctions, a moment of awesome simultaneity is offered. There is no going back, and moving forward is not yet possible. Sort of reminds me of where we are right now, really. So you'll also notice how the performers are spaced. They're at a distance, which seems particularly relevant in this time of social distancing. This performance was at the end of February, before much of this really was unfolding. So here's a 2-minute excerpt from In Afterness. So as you saw and heard, the piece is meditative, ambient. And yeah, the performance they were spaced far apart. The audience wasn't, but that's now something quite from another time. I don't know when we'll have audiences like that again, but I look forward to it. But my intention with the spacing was so that each sound source, whether it was a speaker or an acoustic instrument, bass clarinet or cello, or electric instrument, the guitar, but the audience would be able to perceive each voice distinctly while being surrounded or enveloped in sound. As I said, it was a quadraphonic sound system, so the speakers were placed left and right front, left and right back, and then you could see where the others were placed. For the second piece, the project that I'm currently working on, as I said before, it's a 10-minute operetta, or a micro opera. And it's called Apartmental. The genesis of this collaboration has been far more whimsical. In a nutshell, Opera Harmony's Facebook post soliciting potential composers, librettists, directors, singers, and musicians came up in my newsfeed. And it described assembling international teams to create new micro operas in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The idea being that many opera singers and musicians were out of work. And we're looking for things, projects to focus their energies. So I thought it sounded interesting. So I contacted the director, asked if the creative teams were still being assembled, and she said, yes, send me some work samples and I'll get back to you. So I sent them immediately, and she got back to me immediately and paired me up with a librettist, Mary Birnbaum, who lives in New York City, and director Anna Poole, who lives in London. And here we are. Somehow we've landed on creating an opera buffa, a kind of whodunit comedy. And we didn't originally intend on that, but after getting to know these people a little bit, it just seemed like we needed some kind of a contrast to the heavier aspects of COVID-19. So here's a brief synopsis. Inside 88 West 66th Street, the need to keep clean is making the apartment dwellers crazy. So crazy, in fact, that someone has stolen the concierge's disinfectant wipes from the basement. In a series of scenes that are meant to be played in random order, you'll follow Sophia, the concierge, as she snoops on the inhabitants of the building, each more shady and motivated than her neighbor. Among this wacky and colorful cast of potential suspects, it's hard to distinguish between who's a thief and who has simply lived in New York for far too long. The process has been a dynamic one. It's been a little bit backwards too. So, this idea of collaborating, you never know what you're going to find, really. We're still working on the libretto, but we have a synopsis. The piece itself has not really begun to be set, but we've already made the trailer. So it's kind of wacky and it fits right in. Usually it's the other way around, but right now we're discovering how the piece itself wants to emerge. We're finding this out together with the librettist and composer in the States, as I mentioned, the director in London. The singers and musicians will also be from a variety of locations and countries. So I'd like to share just this one-minute trailer for Apartmental. I should point out that when we began the collaboration, we were going to have each singer video themselves under direction in their own locations using phone cameras, and then edit that into the final form of the video. But librettist Mary Birnbaum had the brilliant idea to engage an artist friend of hers, Jojo Carlin, to make the stick puppets, thinking it would just be for the trailer. But the rest of us have fallen in love with these characters. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make the opera be stick puppets. And then have singers, we'll record them, but then the puppets will be assembled and mixed and blocked and staged in post-production. The whole project has been a bit of a whirlwind, resulting, in this comedic whodunit puppet opera, but between its total duration needing to be under 10 minutes, which is quite a limitation, it all seems really fitting. It needs to be completed by mid-July, and then it'll be streamed in rotation with the other 18 operettas, because there's 19 operettas. It'll be streamed on Opera Europa. It's a European opera streaming network. So this, kind of brings us back to the theme of the presentation about isolation, having opened up new kinds of musical collaborations, international and otherwise, for me and many others. I mean, I think we've all seen kind of an outpouring, I don't know, it's almost a tsunami of creativity that's popping up in many different ways. But I think one of the things that is most important is for all of us to be well prepared to undertake these kinds of projects. Taking the risk to be open to what each person on a creative team has to offer in the collaborative process. I never would have thought that we'd be doing an opera with stick puppets. And I think it's a wonderful thing. It's a great contrast for what else we're doing in life here right now. But hopefully, being open to those sorts of things usually results in a very dynamic work of art that's been created by a creative team. So I would encourage all of you, anybody who's listening here, to take these sorts of artistic risks, because you never know what might be brought to life just by putting it out there and seeing who else responds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Steen. It was a pleasure to hear about your projects and how they relate to these new distant times. I'm very much looking forward to watching my first stick figure opera, hopefully this summer. So, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Likewise.